Jaime Santiago Baca is a prominent American poet and writer. However, his career began when he was orphaned, illiterate, and put behind bars. Despite the prison system's failing education programs, Baca was able to overcome his immense lack of education, cease his criminal career, and go on to contribute to his and your community. Unfortunately, Baca is the rarest of exceptions, and this is not the turn of events for most inmates. Did you know that the United States incarcerates more people than any other country in the world? According to Peter Cadle of the Congressional Quarterly Researcher, over the next 5 years, the number of people in prison will increase by 13%. In order to put that in perspective for you, that is 3 times the growth rate of the national population. Not to mention, aside from the overcrowding in prisons, the United States suffers from an extremely high recidivism rate. And what this means is that there is a high rate of people who, once they leave the prison system, commit more crimes and are put back in jail. The Education and Justice Department in 2013 issued a statement that said, of the 700,000 people who leave prison every single year, 52% of them are reincarcerated. Christy Vischer of the Urban Institute in 2007 did a study and found that the majority of people in prison do have extensive criminal careers. In fact, 4/5 of anyone in any given prison have served time before. Clearly, it is a worthy goal to fix this high recidivism rate, if for no other reason than the public safety dimension. Former prisoners make up 15 to 20% of all arrests, according to Vischer. And what this means for you is that every single year, there are thousands of new instances of victimization that happen from criminals who have already supposedly served their time. And you and your family could be one of these new instances of victimization. Once these prisoners return to prison, they find that the education and job training programs are all but shut down, which leads to them having a lot of free time on their hands to break out in fights, making the prisons harder to run. Not to mention the fiscal implications of this problem. It is a huge expense to incarcerate people. Christy Vischer found that in 1982, it cost $11 billion that the U.S. spent on incarceration. By 1993, that $11 billion had turned into $65 billion. So who's to blame for this problem? The major problem that we're dealing with is prison overcrowding. What happens is, when all these people are in prison and there's only a finite amount of resources going into the system, every penny has to be spent on housing, feeding, healthcare, and there's no money left over to help these prisoners better themselves for when they go out back into your communities. Another problem is that states are dropping their post-secondary education programs. The Institute for Higher Education Policy found 41 states had these post-secondary education programs back in 1983, but by 1997, only 21 states did. And the PrisonStudiesProject.org today says that there are only 23 states have no post-secondary education programs whatsoever. The law is not doing everything that it can to keep our communities safe. Another problem is the public attitude towards prison as punishment versus rehabilitation. And this, hand in hand with the harsh prison culture, creates a difficult cycle. Normal people are arrested, criminals, they go to jail, they interact with more criminals, they learn how to be better criminals, they learn how to survive in prison, and that's all they learn when they're in jail. Then they go back out and then they commit crimes again. This is not something that's working. So what can we do to fix this problem? I'm going to propose a 2-part plan that can be instituted by the Department of Justice and the Department of Education, along with the Bureau of Prisons. My plan has 2 mandates. The first is that we need to have GED programs in every prison, and the way that we'll go about that is by reauthorizing the Second Chance Act. David Mulhausen of the Heritage Foundation defined the Second Chance Act as a bill originally passed in 2007 that gave federal funding to states and local prisons in order to implement GED programs. So why do we need to reauthorize this? It worked. Senator Patrick Leahy said that in Michigan, after the original Second Chance Act was passed, they were able to reduce the prison population by 12% and save $900 million for taxpayers. And these are taxpayers like you who are getting their money allocated to better things than just people rotting away in prison doing nothing. The second part of my plan is that we need to have a post-secondary education program as well, and the way that we will do this is through Pell Grants. Dr. Spivey, an English professor at Vanderbilt University who studies prison and also teaches at a post-secondary level at the Tennessee Prison for Women, Dr. Spivey told me that until 1993, prisoners used to be eligible for these Pell Grants. So what that means is when you apply for financial aid through Vanderbilt University, you get money from a variety of sources, one of which is these Pell Grants. So the federal government pays part of your tuition and it goes straight to the university so you don't have to pay it. And the same thing works for prisoners. The federal government would pay their tuition to the universities. And then universities come in and they bring the teachers and the curriculum and they implement the post-secondary education programs for the prisons, because obviously the prisons don't have the capacity to do that themselves. Aside from these two facets of my plan, it is crucial that this is available to anyone in the system, no matter the length of their sentence. In order to enforce this plan, the Bureau of Prisons will be required to offer these programs to anyone who is eligible and has not already received this type of education. And in exchange, prisoners, in order to participate, must be in good standing and not have any disciplinary infractions. Aside from that, once prisoners complete these programs, they will be given good time credit and possibly get time taken off of their sentence. So there is an incentive for both sides. And as far as the way we're going to fund this, again, two-faceted. As far as the GED program, according to David Mulhausen, in order to reauthorize the Second Chance Act, it will cost $200 million, which admittedly is going to have to come from the taxpayer, but only at first. The way this works is that as prisoners are released from the system and have taken these education courses, they are expected to not come back, so the money saved on no longer housing and feeding these people can be funneled back into the education program and cut the taxpayer out. As far as the Pell Grants and the post-secondary education program, that will be no additional cost because you're simply expanding the pool of people eligible for the grants. It would just simply be like a large class applying to college one year. My plan has 4 major advantages. The first is that educated people are better off after prison. The Department of Justice and Education found that people who participated in these education programs had a 13% higher employment rate after prison than those who did not. Secondly, Dr. Spivey shared with me the story of one of her students who, after getting a taste of education behind bars, once she left prison, went to real college and real universities and got her degree and is able to now support her family and doesn't commit crimes any longer. The second major advantage is that this education lowers the recidivism rate. The Educational Division of the Indiana Department of Corrections did a study in 2007 and found that people who do not complete any type of education programs are 3.7 times more likely to be reincarcerated after their release. The third major advantage is that this actually helps to make the prison culture a better place. Dr. Spivey's students tell her that being in classes is a huge break from the harsh realities of prison culture. They're able to see themselves and one another as people with real ideas and real values rather than just a number in the system. And this actually changes their own identity and the way they view their peers, making the prison environment a better place. And the last advantage, the one that should affect your pockets the most, is that it saves money. The Department of Justice and Education reported that for every $1 that we invest in education within prisons, that will save $4 to $5 in incarceration costs over the next 3 years. Now, despite these major advantages, of course, this is controversial and there are some common counter-arguments, and I will attempt to refute those. The first is that many people say, prison is to protect society. Why are we going to reward criminals for doing something wrong? And to that I would say, how could you possibly think that you are protecting society when all you're doing is putting people in a box to learn to be worse people and then go back out into the world and recommit crimes? The second common counterargument is that people say, okay, that's fine, we'll educate them, but not the people with life sentences because that's a waste of money, they're never going to get out and they don't need jobs, so why do they need education? And Dr. Spivey actually told me in response to this that the lifers, so to speak, or the people with life sentences, actually have the greatest potential to change the prison culture. So they're the ones who the newcomers look to as setting an example. They look and see how they're interacting with everyone else, and if they're getting an education, they have a greater sense of self-worth. That's going to change the entire environment and affect the people who are going back out into our communities. Rather than having rare success stories like that of Jimmy Santiago Baca, who thrived despite the prison education system, the Bureau of Prisons needs to strive to be able to boast the thousands of success stories that could be possible for both individuals and their communities who are able to thrive because of the prison education system. Thank you.